KTN News. Get the whole story.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Today. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden announced a ban on Russian oil and other energy imports on Tuesday in retaliation for the invasion of Ukraine, after scoring stronger bipartisan support for a move that he acknowledged will drive up U.S. energy prices. Oil prices jumped on the news, with benchmark Brent crude LCOCI for May climbing by 5.4% to 129.91 a barrel by 13:45 GMT. And of course, with allies in Europe who are far more, we have this particular story running. I think Mautoku is just going ahead of me. Just listening to what he had to say.
Today, I'm announcing the United States is targeting the main artery of Russia's economy. We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable at U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine. This is a move that has strong bipartisan support in the Congress and, I believe, in the country. Americans have rallied to support their Ukrainian people and made it clear we will not be part of subsidizing Putin's war. We made this decision in close consultation with our allies and our partners around the world, particularly in Europe, because a united response to Putin's aggression has been my overriding focus, to keep all NATO and all of the EU and our allies totally united. We're moving forward with this ban, understanding that many of our European allies and partners may not be in a position to join us. The United States produces far more oil domestically than all the European countries combined. In fact, we're a net exporter of energy. So we can take this step when others cannot. But we're working closely with Europe and our partners to develop a long-term strategy to reduce their dependence on Russian energy as well.
Even while that is happening, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for maximum restraint in Ukraine and said China is pained to see the flames of war reignited in Europe. State media reported this in his strongest statement to date on the conflict. Xi, speaking at a virtual meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, said the three countries should jointly support peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. She described the situation in Ukraine as worrying and said the priority should be preventing it from escalating or spinning out of control. He also said France and Germany should make efforts to reduce the negative impacts of crisis and express concern about the impact of sanctions on the stability of global finance energy supplies.
Chinese President Xi Jinping came out with his strongest statement yet regarding Russia's invasion of Ukraine, calling for maximum restraint and saying he is, quote, pained to see the flames of war reignited in Europe, Chinese state media reported Tuesday. Xi spoke at a virtual meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and, according to China's CCTV.
Now, the Pentagon has rejected a surprise announcement from Poland that it will give the United States its MiG-29 fighter jets for use by Ukraine, a rare display of disharmony as NATO allies seeks to boost Ukrainian fighters while avoiding getting caught up in a wider war with Russia. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said Poland's declaration that it intended to deliver the 28 jets to the U.S. Ramstein Air Base in Germany raised the concerning prospects of warplanes departing from U.S. and NATO base to fly into airspace contested with Russia in the Ukraine conflict. The proposed gift of more warplanes will be a moral booster for Ukrainians now under Russian assault for nearly 2 weeks. But it also raises the risk of the war expanding beyond Ukraine. White House officials were blindsided by the Polish government announcement on the MiGs. The proposal did not come up during talks with Secretary of State Antony Blinken when he was recently in Poland, according to a U.S. official familiar with the talks. Right, that's the basis of also our discussion so far, looking at what Russia is of course, happening or doing to Ukraine with the war currently, and as we've mentioned, also that one is remotely connected with us here in the country as well, knowing that imports are affected. Cooking gas has gone up so far, and cooking oil has been affected as well. Even now, our import of wheat from Russia will be adversely affected. Let's just now put things down to brass tacks and discuss the issues at hand. First of all, this particular ban of U.S. oil, importing Russia oil to U.S., how will it globally affect the stability of the economy?
Well, there is no question in my mind that the international community, and by the international community here I mean the United States and Western Europe, because that's a euphemism for the international community in current discourse. I think that the economic sanctions that are going to be brought to bear are going to be devastating for Russia, devastating to a certain extent, and the reason they might not be that devastating is the role of China. The oil markets developed under OPEC, once they cut the Russian oil contribution, I think the other nations are going to up their game so that they could fill that for the international community. But the wild card here, Debal, is China, which is the second largest economy in the world, and they share border with Russia. I think that the Chinese are going to help Russia economically through this, in my view. I don't think that the economic sanctions that the Americans and Western Europe are going to put there are going to take the kind of bite that will stop Russia's engagement or invasion of Ukraine. I think that the relationship between Russia and China is going to be very crucial. But at the end of the day, to solve this problem, that there has to be negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. And this war has to end. You could see the devastation that Ukraine is going through. Probably the political leadership of Ukraine has thought about negotiations, and I'm sure the Russians also want to negotiate because this war is in nobody's interest, and particularly Ukraine. But Debal, I want to say something really, really important about this war. And that is the way in which the media has portrayed the war. Debal, if you remember the invasion of countries by the United States in South America, if you remember the Iraq invasion, if you remember what has happened in Syria, it is unprecedented, Debal, the way in which the suffering of different human beings has been brought to our screens. If you look at the suffering that has been brought, and we feel and we morally support Ukraine's right to its integrity as a nation, and our hearts reach out to the suffering of the people of Ukraine as any other human being would. But Debal, you see, if you look at the media and the way they're portraying the suffering of the Ukrainians and the way they were portraying the suffering of the Syrians and the Iraqis, I think it makes you just wonder at how the media understands human life and how it values human life. Because the darker the skin you have, the different color of hair that you have, the language that you speak, determines how the media portrays you. So if you look at the media images today of Ukraine, it's not different from someone from Milwaukee or from Kansas or from any other European people of European descent. And it makes a moral travesty of how that media, the same media covered Iraq and Syria, in which people, Iraq and Syria were much more prosperous than Ukraine, if not at the same level. And, in Iraq, you would ask whether people were driving cars, they would understood English. The portrayal was deeply prejudicial. And I think that the entire world is now watching that kind of double standard as far as how it is portrayed. It is unfortunate that two victims are being put together as a discourse about race and class in international relations. But nonetheless, we have to point this out, and we have to say that that double standard must stop in the media.
Thank you. Double standard in the media must stop. Professor Kagwanja, also looking at your piece on Sunday, you talked extensively in one of the dailies regarding this particular war affecting Africa, but we can never gaze also how it can affect, or it's affecting the country right now in terms of imports from Russia. Looking also at the Nairobi Securities Exchange as well, the foreign investors are there. Some of them also are pulling out at the end of the day. The market is getting spooked. We can see what is happening also to the commodities with that particular pronouncement from Biden banning the oil import from Russia. Briefly.
Well, let me start where my brother Hashi stopped. And I'm reminded of W.E. Du Bois, the great Pan-Africanist, who said that the problem of the 20th century is simply the color line, the race. And I would say that it is still the problem of the 21st century. And I think that's what Hashi is speaking to, that we're seeing so many, glaring contrast between the sympathy that is given to Ukraine and the dignity that's given to the people who are fleeing, and the dehumanization of the Syrians, for example, who are moving to Turkey and other European countries. So it's important to be clear that those of us in Africa really detest the double standards that are going on. We are not saying that there must be negative, but we'd like the same standards applied to the other civilizations. Now, regarding the issue of the impact of this, my main focus was the impact on security, because that's the area where people are likely to ignore, or analysts are likely to ignore. Already, we begin to see the pain of Ukrainian war on us. First, if you now want to buy your gas, you're going to buy possibly 25% to 30% higher than you were doing 2 weeks ago. That's already a reality. The same case with oil, because we import much of our oil there. Kenya and many countries in this region, Africa, are the main importers of wheat from Ukraine and Russia, the two countries. But we have not seen the damage of this war yet, because the area where it's going to damage is the level of fertilizers, because we consume most of our fertilizers from Russia, Ukraine, and China. So unless we up our imports from China in terms of our fertilizers, then our agricultural industry is going to suffer immensely from this war. And I think finally we need to refocus attention. Now, I know America is really putting these strengths. I think these are symbolic, given the low level of American dependence on Russian oil. Germany is mostly 70% plus, of their energy consumption is from China. The rest of Europe, in various degrees, either gas and oil, particularly gas. Remember, this is winter. So nothing much is going to have, this is very good, this is symbolic, nothing much is going to come from these sanctions. The truth of the matter is that we need to have concerted effort to look at the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis. We are now bandaging the wound, but we are not even looking at what caused the wound. And last week we talked about NATO.
Yes.
And its encroachment on the Eastern European. And the same thing you are going to see when we talk about the Pacific pivot, or the American pivot to the Pacific, and the Chinese reaction. So we need to respect international order, that times are gone when we had this one police officer, policing the group. America need now to understand that, or Europe need to understand that we are talking about multipolarity. And that multipolarity disrespect of that multipolarity is what is breeding this unilateralism of major powers. America has been involved in huge cases of multilateralism. The destruction of one of our most advanced economies in Libya. In the guise of trying to get rid of Muammar Gaddafi. The messing up with Egypt in terms of interference with Hosni Mubarak and his successors. And outside Africa, you have seen what has happened in countries like Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, and even Pakistan. So, in other words, that's America. We have not even talked about South America and the way they are dealing with rebels and toppling government behind the scenes. So we kept quiet when that unilateralism went on. Now we have begun now to see unilateralism by other emerging powers. And this is the Russian case. We've not even seen the unilateralism of China if China's interests are threatened. And that is going to multiply the insecurity of our continent, of our planet. And I think what we need to say here is that we have entered a phase of multiplicity of civilizations, and we need to respect each other's space, because and that way we will have a stable planet and not what we are having today.
All right. If we come to you, Ambassador Erastus Moincha, yes, we know this particular pronouncement by Biden. Germany also has made a U-turn from their stance that there is no military engagement for the longest year, since they have a history and the legacy with the military, especially when we had the final solution with Adolf Hitler. But right now they're saying also we're going to send arms to Ukraine, and they're also stopping this particular Nordic 2 stream at the end of the day, that particular conversation to cut off oil completely from Russia. But Europe is largely dependent on the oil from Russia. Almost 40% of it is oil, 35% is the gas at the end of the day.
Let's look at this from 2 angles. One is the economy, and the other one the politics of this move. On the economy, it's very clear that the banning of oil is to have vibrations around the world. And we are going to see 3 aspects affected. First of all, the currencies would be affected because, and if I translate it to our economy itself, it's not unthinkable for us to see weakening of our shilling. And if you translate that to the economic aspects, first globally, I think the IMF statement of December, where there was more optimism that the world, as COVID was receding, we are going to see growth. We may have to revise that very seriously downwards, because this is going to have negative impact. The second one is on the markets, particularly growth. You will see markets really, stock markets already being affected. The ruble, you can see already Russia, they even stopped them. So this is going to be a very serious move. And finally, you will see inflation. And this inflation is going to translate into hurting. And you have seen that the Taifa is spot on in saying Putin hurts Kenya, because Kenya exports tea, and tea is one of our major exports from Russia and Ukraine, in addition to the imports that come. So we're going to see a really shaky growth in the future and a serious impact. Now, on the politics of it, let me build on what the 2 colleagues, Peter and Harsh, have said. And I think this is the sad part of it. If you see the reaction from Africa, it has been muted. Other than actually the statement by Ambassador Kimani Martin, much of Africa has remained muted. And I've asked myself why. Of course, the answer is in 2 aspects. Partly historical, in the sense that those who remember Soviet Union supported Africa a lot, especially in the quest for decolonization. And so many people, like you could see South African foreign minister, what they were saying, and this is what we also said here before, that whereas Russia had a case, they shouldn't have done that. And actually, Ambassador Kimani's statement rests on the AU Foundation, which was done, 1963, which said we must respect borders as inherited from colonial. And if you look at what is at stake, Putin is still nostalgic about rebuilding the Soviet Union and all that. And this is exactly what Kenya was saying in that statement. But I think what the optics of what my colleagues have brought out is important. When we had this crisis in Syria, in Iraq, and in Libya, all in succession, and you saw refugees streaming out of Africa and all that, you saw Europe build a fort to stop these refugees. And what happened inside Europe? We saw fascist movements start, right-wing governments, and all this leading to Brexit and what have you, all predicated on anti-migration and the rest. And it's all because, as Ash was saying, Europe could not fathom the idea that you are bringing in these people who don't look like us to come and, dilute our purity. And so I think this is a lesson, but I don't think it's something for us to really say, okay, let it happen. What we have seen, the world has received those refugees from Putin in a very good way, welcoming them to their homes, giving them food, giving them warmth. And I think that is the human spirit that we should embrace. And I think Europe should learn from this. The second one, and I think this is fundamental, this is going to alter the geopolitics again. I think the Cold War is here, and it's going to be serious. If you listen to the statement of what China is saying, if you look at what has happened before, we have come from a world where it was unipolar, we are now going to multipolar, but with very complex geopolitics. And this politics is going to hurt those that will be caught in the crossfire. And Africa, unfortunately, may have to be caught in this crossfire.
All right, so we're in the crosshairs, as it were. We caught up in the crossfire. We can see economically, as you're alluding to as well. Peter Biarajak, your sentiment as well?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Jabal, for bringing this topic. This topic is very, very, very important. As I mentioned the other day, what we are talking about here is an issue of human tragedy. Is something that is happening in real time. We are watching it literally as it happens before our eyes. So I think it's an issue that we all feel very strongly about. I want to agree with my colleagues about how racist the coverage of the crisis has been, and also the double standards in terms of bringing in refugees, how those refugees are treated. I completely agree with that. And I also agree with the fact that this conflict is going to affect the global economy in so many fundamental ways, because energy is an input that is used in everything. So you're going to see across the board price levels rising in a very intense ways that we have never seen before. So everything literally is going to go up, not just only the fuel, but everything is going to go up just because of the crisis that is happening. And I also believe Africa is really going to be affected in fundamental ways. Now, on the issue of the announcement that President Biden made, if you put it in context, U.S. imports only about 8% of its energy consumption from Russia. In a dollar value, this is about $22 million per month. Per day. So $660 million a month. It may seem a lot, but it's really little when you compare it to the overall size of Russian export in the energy sector. So in my view, I agree, this is really a political statement, and Biden didn't actually want to do it. He was pushed to do it, and he was pushed by Congress, and particularly because he has midterms that are coming up in November, and already he's not doing very well in the polls here in the U.S., and he's at the risk of losing the House of Representatives as well as the Senate. So he has to be very careful how to manage the international politics with his own domestic agenda. Now already the U.S. is trying to find other sources to fill the gap that is going to be created by this decision. So yesterday, they sent a delegation to Venezuela. They are meeting now in Venezuela. And you know, the interesting thing is the relation between the U.S. and Venezuela over the last 7 years has been quite awful. In fact, Venezuela is sanctioned, and the U.S. does not even recognize the government of President Maduro, recognize a purported regime led by Juan Guaido. So it's very interesting to see how that is going to unfold. But there are three things that I want to note about. First, if you see how the war is even being protested in Russia, that is something that should give you a hint of how majority of Russian people feel about this. Already, 13,000 people have been arrested in Russia just over the last 10 days because of protests about this conflict. It's a war that is very unpopular. Russian government is completely blocking the coverage of the war in Ukraine, is using a propaganda, and people of Russia are coming out saying that there is no reason why we should be fighting the war in Ukraine. So this is not a war that is popular at home. The second thing that also Putin did not calculate is the resistance of Ukraine military. We talked last week about that huge convoy that was approaching Kyiv. And I recall I mentioned that this convoy is not even going to reach Kyiv. Even today it has not reached Kyiv. It has not even moved a mile since last week. Why? What people don't understand when they talk about Russia, they just think about Soviet Union. They don't remember the Russia of the last 20 years. The Russia of the last 20 years is a kleptocracy. Kleptocracy is a unique form of government where corruption and authoritarianism are mixed. The regime is there not necessarily to deliver services or to advance state interests, but basically to enrich itself. So you have all these amount of money that is budgeted for the Russian army. Very little of that is actually going to the Russian army. Now is emerging that the money that was put aside for development of some sophisticated weapon system end up being used to buy luxury yachts and to buy houses in London and in other parts of the world. So Russian military is now exposed. And Ukraine, on the other hand, is getting all the support that it can get from Western Europe.
Thank you.
So you see now the Russian military cannot even perform. Second, the third is the financial sanction. I agree, the energy sanction doesn't mean a lot, but the financial sanctions are severe. And Russian economy is completely going to be downgraded. Yes, China will play a role, but what will happen is instead of Russia being a great power as we used to know it, Russia is just simply going to be a gas station for China. That's it. A gas station with nuclear weapons. That's it.
This part of the Cold War, the impact is going to be phenomenal.
I like that. Russia is going to be a gas station for China. But just a moment, Hashi wants to make a rejoinder there. We've seen also the pronouncement from Xi Jinping today in regard to asking constraint, especially or restraint, I should say, with Russia right now. But earlier on, we've seen also when they were on the same podium on the Winter Olympics and saying that this is a strategic partnership and there is no limit at the end of the day. Do you think also Xi Jinping is speaking from both sides of the mouth at the end of the day when he says, oh, we want restraint, but no limits to a strategic partnership? Hamid Hashi.
Debal, a country like Russia that produced Pushkin, who's from my community. Pushkin was an Ethiopian from the Somali side. So if someone who produces Pushkin cannot be a gas station. So I think that kind of swashbuckling things shouldn't be part of our analysis.
No, but that is just an analogy.
No, I know, but it needs a response. We have to be careful about what we say. The second thing is I think the relationship between China and Russia is very critical. And I think that we are now seeing the emergence of a bloc of states that are going to stand up to the unilateralism that Professor Kaganja was speaking about. Debal, there's a guy called Mearsheimer who wrote a book called, which made a lot of waves when he wrote it, Will We Soon Miss the Cold War? It seems like Mr. Mearsheimer predicted much of what although it comes from the right wing of the American ideological perspective. from the realism school. I believe that he made some astute prophecies. And I think about that this axis between China and Russia is going to change the economic and political dynamics of international relations in the short to medium term.
Thank you.
And the last point is, I think the question is that we should start asking whether the United States is a hegemon anymore in this world.
Thank you.
That is a profound question that we need to ask.
All right. Let me just cross over to Dr. Mustafa. I think I lost Mustafa in the shuffle. Dr. Mustafa, my apologies.
No worries, Dibal. Thank you, Dibal. I want to make 3 points. First of all, very quickly, the flagrant violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity stands condemned. Russia should not have done what it did. It's unlawful, and we must condemn that kind of invasion by any country. The second point that I'd like to make, Dibal, here is that Ukraine's misdeeds started with the tacit acceptance after the NATO's summit in Bucharest in April of 2008, in which NATO declared that Georgia and Ukraine are going to be NATO members, and that immediately made Russia's antenna to rise. You can imagine, Dibal, if let's take an example when Nikita Khrushchev and the Russian leaders put nuclear weapons in Cuba. What did the United States do? Kennedy applied the Monroe Doctrine and said, no, we are going to quarantine you, we are going to have a no-fly zone, we are going to ensure that bomb you into the sea or take out the nuclear weapons that you have in Cuba. Essentially, what the West was trying to do is to position nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And Russia was not going to accept that. So all this interventionist policy, the Roosevelt Doctrine, Monroe Doctrine, that U.S. has been practicing, is something that also they need to know that will affect their own security, and other superpowers, other nations don't like that. What is good for US is also good for Russia. What is good for Russia should also be good for Ukraine. So there should be this kind of differential treatment that are there between various countries, mini-states, super-states, superpowers, and those that have very little power. The third point here, Dibal, is the double standards and hypocrisy that we actually see on practiced by the international community. Right now, Hashi talked about this, Ambassador Mwencha and Professor Kagwanja, that the way the media is portraying this war is akin to saying that it's okay for Africans to suffer. And it's appearing now, it's being confirmed now that suffering has an identity. The identity of black, the identity of brown, the identity of Muslims. We never spoke so much about, or the West did not care much about Libya, about Syria. Iraq was invaded. And by the way, Ukraine participated in that invasion in Iraq in 2003. So we shouldn't be having this kind of double standard. We must condemn all invasions. We must condemn all occupations, irrespective of who is invading or occupying the other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me go back to Professor Peter Kagwanja. And we can see also in this particular arena that we are in, also Russia is using a lot of misinformation and disinformation when you talk about the military doctrine of maskirovka. This is a Russian term, maskirovka. Is what Putin also is trying to deploy at the end of the day, a mind game. So what he's actually putting to the populace in Russia is diametrically different on what is happening on the ground at the end of the day. You can expand on it with that military strategy.
Those who study military doctrines and practices will know that you cannot be a Russian general or simply put, your war plan cannot be approved until it has a very strong element of deception. And that is characteristic of most war plans, but the Russians are known to be best in terms of creating decoys and other kind of forms of military. And that is reflected in the kind of use and misuse of information, or what you can call the manipulation of information relating to the operation the going on in Ukraine.
Yes, yes.
And this is no more. It's the same case with America. The idea that you're going to Afghanistan to bomb the caves in the name of freedom. You know, you rename chips from French fries to freedom fries. I mean, this is normal, you know, and that you all of a sudden want to hang, you know, Saddam by saying that he has nuclear arsenals and whatever, when in essence he's hiding in the caves. If he had the nuclear arsenal, he would have been next to them, basically to destroy his enemies. So lies are part of it. And it's the same thing that we hear from our brother Jack, Peter Jack, when he says Russia is going to be a gas station.
Gas station is very bad.
I mean, really, this is pushing the joke too far. We are really talking about a resurgent Russia. And those who study international relations, if you ever try to read the Foreign Affairs Journal magazine, the theme from 2000 to date is a resurgent Russia. And Russia, by now, might be very, very close to where it was in 1991, or perhaps even beyond, even as it is. And Russia now controls Europe, has a stronger grip over Europe than it had in 1945, or so when the war was ending. Why do I say so? Because Europe is dependent on Russian resources. And Russia has made sure that Europe is dependent on it. It's a new strategy of domination. Rather than massing soldiers on the Russian-Europe border, it has now entered Europe. And it's in every European kitchen, it's in every European sitting room and bedroom in terms of heating and so on. Even food, much of wheat consumed in Western Europe is also from Russia. It controls 30% of all wheat production globally, both Russia and Ukraine. So what's the point? The alliance between China and Russia as former communist blocs is growing stronger. And that was very clear from voting in the United Nations Security Council. But so China is more concerned about the non-Western parts of the world, of the human civilization, as a counter to the West, because it is clear that if China does not hang with the others, it is going to be hanged separately. And China is not willing to be hanged separately. For many of us in Africa, we keep talking about the death burden, the colonization and all that. China is not interested in that. It is interested in developing Africa out of poverty and getting an ally who is going to be voting with it, who is going to be trading with it, and then making Europe and Western civilization irrelevant as far as human civilization was, as it was in 1870. Those who are historians will tell you about the whatever. Before 1870, China was the center of the world. 1870. It is when we now begin to see Britain rising, Germany rising, and then the colonization and so on. So Russia cannot be a gas station, and China cannot be just this neutral power that you are expecting. It is heavily aligned to Russia. It's heavily aligned to African governments for its own strategic survival.
All right. Let's hear from Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, because what we can see, this strategic partnership between China and Russia is, a war between totalitarianism and, democracy at the end of the day. A resurgence of, the superpowers that were. We had Russia at one point. China now has emerged strongly, and it's a given right now that yes, in terms of being at parity with the US, or even going over and above US, they will overtake US on that particular angle, even economically. So is this what we're seeing, that the might and main that we have aggression in Ukraine by Putin, China supporting it, subtly, condemning it, saying, oh, we are calling for restraint at the end of the day, but they say there are no limits to a partnership.
I want to agree to a large extent to what Peter said, that if you look at China, China had already come up with its own model of Belt and Road Initiative, and where China was also bringing in the coalition of the willing. And if you look at the participation in that forum, you see even Russia in it. And don't forget also that they had come with this also organization where you brought South Africa, China, America, Brazil, and all that, all aimed at trying to move away from the unipolar, this unilateralism that the US was pushing. And a lot of people would have also said the Washington consensus as an economic policy has not really delivered the gains as it is implemented, because the Washington consensus, if you look at it where it has been implemented to the letter, it is really brought in an element where countries are receding to poverty. We in Kenya embraced the Washington consensus model quite a lot. And you can see what has happened, particularly in some of the sectors where government would have wanted to provide some subsidy and the rest. And all these, but you can see those are now coming back indirectly, where instead of giving subsidies, say, to the industry, you are subsidizing production or inputs and the rest. So there is a shift, and I think you can see democracy is on the dead bed, it's on the dead bed. And I think this is not something we should celebrate, because they say, the Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government, but there is nothing better. But I think that is within, Churchill's scope. If you look at, for instance, the way Biden is running his administration, he is paralyzed. He can't get anything going through. And so democracy is really not attractive, as it were. And I think what Peter is saying, you are going to see a new realignment, where we will see countries now forming alliances to counter this force that was taking us in unipolar, and what will emerge is maybe more of, and when China overtakes America, because China today is $17 billion, US is about 23 trillion, and I see in another 10 years China overtaking. We may end up with a new system altogether globally. So that's why this new Cold War is something to watch.
New Cold War is something to watch. Right, thank you. Maybe we can just wind up on it, and briefly we just talk on something that each of you will just give a one-liner. Let's hear from Peter Biarajak. We know that in terms of weaponry, Russia also has deployed the thermobaric weaponry on the ground as well. And when we're talking about the escalation and even the nuclear alerts that President Putin has also put forward, what does this really portend when you deploy thermobaric weaponry on the ground? Briefly.
It's basically, it means basically what I told you earlier. What happened is Russian military has not really modernized at the same scale that the American or the Chinese military have been able to modernize. It still uses a lot of old weapons, many of which are actually not acceptable according to international standards, because they end up causing a lot of civilian tragedies. So they have used some guided missile, but I think by now a lot of the arsenal is probably depleted. From basically the estimates we are looking at now, 10% of the Russian hardware has been destroyed in Ukraine. They've been struggling with logistics, and if you combine that with the warning on the nuclear side, it's basically confirmed what the CIA director was saying earlier today, that Putin believes that this war in Ukraine is a war that he cannot lose. And in fact, he's going to double down. And I know with my colleagues here, there's a lot of emotional reaction, and we are not looking at the data. when I mentioned that Russia is going to be a gas station for China, I was looking at the numbers. Look at the numbers. Oil and gas counts for 40% of Russian revenue, 40% of the Russian budget. They also account for 60% of Russian exports. And then also, if you combine the natural resource sector as a whole, it's count up to 60% of the GDP. This is an economy that is dependent on natural resources. Yes, it has other things like semiconductors that it produces, but these are the sectors that rely on technology transfer from the West, which has now been sanctioned. So what is going to remain is the natural resource. And you can be emotional and quote our good friend and the poet Pushkin, which is a tragic history too, because if I remember, Pushkin was killed in a duel by a guy who slept with his wife. You know, so it's a kind of a tragic analogy. And if you look at the past, power has always been able to transition. Even Mali, as a state today, is reduced to one of very low-income state. But at some point in the 14th century, Mali was the richest country in the world. In fact, the richest man in the history of humankind is a Malian. So it doesn't mean that at some point, because Soviet Union was great, then Russia today is great. Russia today is only 50% of the economy of California, one state in the United States. The US economy is 13 times larger than the economy of Russia.
Thank you.
And I was just telling you before how it is basically a natural resource reliant economy.
Thank you.
So it is a gas station.
Thank you, thank you. Oh, let's leave it at that. Just in other news that maybe we should be privy to, the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism is opening a new program office in Nairobi to support countries in East Africa and the Horn of Africa to counter terrorism and prevent violent extremism. The launch event is being held in coordination with the government of Kenya at the United Nations Office of Nairobi. It will gather government representatives from Kenya and countries in the region, the diplomatic community, the global, regional and national partners. The new program office will enable UNOCT to provide real-time support to the members, states and other stakeholders in East Africa and the Horn of Africa as they work to deliver on the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy. And in attendance today, of course, we'll have Dr. Fred Matiang'i, Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination of National Government of the Republic of Kenya. Also, we'll have Dr. Jehangir Khan, Director of the United Nations Counterterrorism Center with UNOCT. Also, Ambassador Martin Kimani, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Kenya to the United Nations, New York. So that is happening today, and there will be a symbolic ribbon cutting at 1 p.m. at, of course, here in the country. So we'll be giving you this briefing, of course, later in the day as well. But still, as we're winding up, I want to hear from, there is a crocodile in town. Crocodile, he's in town.
That's Peter Jack's name, Crocodile.
Yeah, there's a crocodile in town. And
You mean Peter is here?
Crocodile is in town and
Dinka,
Habarashi.
I think in Dinka, you know, Anyang Nyongo is a crocodile. It's called a crocodile.
Is it?
Yes.
It's actually a warning.
Anyang Nyongo.
Yeah,
Yes.
So I think
In
Peter,
Dinka.
So Peter Ajak must be a spotted leopard.
No. Absolutely not.
So Debal, what was your question again?
Now you see, Hashi, we're winding up.
Making fun of Peter. That I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, you would actually say, I say the crocodile is in town.
Yes.
And then you're alluding to Anyang Nyongo in Dinka is...
Yes, Anyang means crocodile.
Anyang.
So I was wondering what Ajak means.
Anyang Nyongo, the crocodile will eat you.
The crocodile will eat you.
When Anyang Nyongo comes to the show, I'll ask him that. The crocodile will eat me. Anyang Nyongo.
And Kiraitu himself is
the
known as Kenganyi. Kenganyi is a crocodile, the Kemeru. I don't know what's Kenyan's fascination with crocodiles.
I don't know. It's very, very interesting.
On an interesting note, of course, the president of Zimbabwe is in the country on a 3-day state tour on that as well. We know what has been happening in Zimbabwe currently.
Yes.
Yeah, you can weigh in on that.
Well,
just a one-liner briefly.
On another network, you remember when people thought that I was a spirit of some kind when I predicted the coup d'etat against Robert Mugabe. You were sitting in that chair. 3 months after the coup happened and I walked into the studio, everybody stood up and said, this man is a spirit. How did he predict this?
Kagwanja was there.
Kagwanja was there. So, Zimbabwe, when it got independent, it was the breadbasket of Africa. It was producing food and exporting food to London. Forget about sending it to Malawi and Kenya and all these other places.
No, Hashi, I just want you to give you a one-liner because we're stuck for time.
Okay, so we'll talk about it next week. And, my one-liner about Zimbabwe is I think the ZANU-PF should be overthrown. They should be thrown out of public office. They failed Zimbabwe completely. And we need a complete change of guard in Zimbabwe.
If he's watching, he's really...
And if he's watching, tell him my name is Ahmed Hashi. He can complain to President Kenyatta if he wishes.
Professor Kagwanja, briefly, one-liner.
President Mnangagwa was the bag carrier for Robert Mugabe, and his counterpart Lex Munjuru was the gun carrier. So we have the rule of the bag carrier. We hope it's going to be better than that of the gun carrier. The point here is that Zimbabwe remains Africa's symbol of resistance to Western colonialism.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Rasas Boincha, I know you will be kind. Not like Hashi?
Yeah, I think we should welcome the small steps that Zimbabwe is taking to normalize politics in the region, but also to bring about economic recovery.
Thank you.
Small as it is, we should encourage them to continue to do even more.
Thank you. Right, Dr. Mustafa, briefly.
Yeah, Dibal, Zimbabwe is a victim of both poor leadership in the past and colonialism. So it's a very difficult thing it was very difficult for Zimbabwe to pull out of colonialism where, most of the land were occupied by the former colonialists. And we pray for Zimbabwe, we wish them well, and we would like them to come up to go back to where they used to be, a successful country.
Thank you. Lastly, Peter Bierajak.
Zimbabwe is a disaster, and Mnangagwa is a disaster. He is a part of a small clique of leaders who are kleptocrats. They rule simply to enrich themselves. I don't think he cared whatsoever about the people of Zimbabwe. So I don't know what he's doing in Kenya.
Yeah, okay, let's wind up the show on that note. Of course, he's here to cement a relationship with Zambia as well, and we shall also be briefing you later on that particular beat as well. Thank you very much to our panelists, Ahmed Hashi, also Professor Peter Kagwanja, Ambassador Rasas Mwencha. I really do appreciate Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali and Dr. Peter Bierajak all the way from Washington for such a treat this morning, informing our viewers on what is happening on the global trend. Thank you for your valid company. I am Dibala Nair. Don't go away, much more coming up on the Youth and Politics segment with Jesse Rogers.
Great show.